Do you want me to do it instead?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. %, of the non-Markan material is common to both Matthew and Luke. Now, what would this common stuff be that's not in Mark?
Q.
Right. That's why we suspect Q. They have all the stuff that's the same. 20% of the stuff that's identical between Matthew and Luke. If we line up Matthew and Luke and we say, what do they all have that's identical? 20% of the identical stuff is not in Mark. So this is the stuff that scholars would suspect was in Q. And then as I've already just said, they found the Gospel of Thomas in they had known of the Gospel of Thomas before because it had been referred to in other literature, and there were fragments of the Gospel of Thomas, but with the Nag Hammadi find, they found a full copy of the Gospel of Thomas. And with it, they were like, oh my gosh, a bunch of this stuff is in there as well. Which would make sense if there was this common source.
What do they suspect that it is?
What do you mean?
Like, where do they think it came from, or what do they think they know?
They don't really know. I mean, they suspect that it was similar to the Gospel of Thomas in that, what did I say the Gospel of Thomas had in it? Just sayings, right? There are no stories. There's no Jesus died and rose from the dead. None of that Jesus performed miracles. That's not at all in the Gospel of Thomas. All it is a series of sayings. Jesus said. Jesus said. Well, most of the stuff that we see that looks like it was part of Q is very similar. So scholars presume that there must have been a genre of texts that were just collections of sayings, and that Q was probably one of these types of things that was just a collection of Jesus' sayings. One thing that they like about Q is that if they're right about this hypothesis, it's probably the oldest material that we have, right? Mark was probably written around when? The New Testament was, as a whole, was written. When was Mark written specifically, probably? Guess. Around 70, which is about 40 years after Jesus died. Q, if Q existed, as scholars posit, was probably older than Mark, which means it probably is more reliable than Mark as a source of the things that Jesus might have said. So one of the things that scholars like about Mark is, that they like about Q is that it must be really old stuff. So that stuff that's in Matthew and Luke that they suspect was part of Q, they think is more reliably older material. Okay, this is the four-source hypothesis. Let's pretend you're scholars and you're looking at Mark, Matthew, and Luke. You could come up with a four-source hypothesis, but what else could you say? You could explain these similarities in other ways. What else? How else might you explain it?
Maybe that, like, the Q is actually just word of mouth, or like more stories if they were written after one another.
Yeah, you could say that maybe it was just an oral source rather than a written source.
Oral, but I don't know the timeline of Matthew and Luke, but if one of them could have been referencing the other one, and that's where the information was from.
Oh wait, say that again.
Like if, let's say Luke was written after Matthew, Luke could have used Matthew, and that could have been where Q came from.
Right. The four-source hypothesis is one example, or one explanation. Another example is just that Mark was written, Matthew copied Mark, and then Luke just copied Matthew. That would explain as well the similarities, right? red stuff is in Matthew and Luke. Mark could have been written, Matthew could have copied it, Luke could have copied Matthew. We could say that Matthew added this and added, we could say that Matthew added the blue stuff and the green stuff, and then Luke just added his own stuff as well. So, another solution to the synoptic problem is this. There is no Q source. The only reason why Matthew and Luke have similar material is because Luke copied it out of Matthew. This is another solution for the four-source hypothesis. Scholars like it. Some scholars like it. Some scholars like it because it doesn't require positing Q, right? Some scholars get really antsy. They're like, oh, you're making up stuff now. You used Q. Well, I bet Matthew and Mark, they probably used X, Y, and Z too, huh? Right? Scholars are like, why would you make up all this extra stuff when it could be more simply just that one guy copied another guy? If you explain it that way, you don't have to make up these non-existent sources. So, one of the reasons why some scholars like this solution, and just so I can distinguish it from the other, this is called Farrer's hypothesis, because a guy named Farrer came up with this one. One reason why someone would prefer Farrer's solution to the four-source hypothesis is because you don't have to make up invisible sources. In addition, no, I'm not going to go into that. Some reasons against Farrer's hypothesis or Farrer's solution. It doesn't answer the question as to why Luke would throw out so much. Just to give you a really simple example, open up your Bibles to the Gospel of Matthew. Actually, I want Brian on over, you guys look up Matthew 1. And Jenny on over here, you guys look up Luke 1. Actually, I don't think it's Luke 1, but get to Luke and I'll find out the specific passage. It's in Matthew. Matthew 1. The Luke crowd, you guys look up Luke chapter 3, starting with verse 23. Luke 3:23. What's Matthew 1 about? Well, just glance at it. What's it look like? 1 verse 1, what's it talking about?
Jesus the Messiah.
And?
Son of David, the son of Abraham.
What's the very first line?
An account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah.
The book of Matthew starts out with a genealogy.